Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching the massive creature pace in the containment facility below. The beast stood nearly 4 meters tall, its midnight black carapace gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. Razor-sharp claws scraped against the titanium floor with each step, leaving deep gouges in the supposedly indestructible surface. "Magnificent, isn't it?" came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Commander Voss, the Zentaurian station chief, approaching with his typical military bearing. His blue-scaled skin reflected the sterile lights, and his 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep concern among his species. "Magnificent and terrifying," Sarah replied, turning back to observe the creature. "The Shadow Maw has been contained for 3 weeks now, and your security reports show it's killed 4 handlers and injured 12 others. Why exactly did you request a human xenobiologist?" Voss's mandibles clicked nervously. "Because every other species in the galaxy has given up. The Krillians declared it untamable. The Vorthon Confederacy suggested immediate termination. Even the hive-minded collective refused to attempt communication." He paused, studying Sarah with all 3 eyes. "Humans have a reputation for achieving the impossible with hostile life forms." Sarah had heard such claims before. Throughout the galaxy, humans were known for their stubborn refusal to accept that certain creatures were beyond reach. While other species approached dangerous fauna with weapons or barriers, humans seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to form connections with even the most aggressive beings. "What do we know about its behavior patterns?" Sarah asked, pulling up her datapad to review the creature's file. "It's from Nexus 7, a death world where surface temperatures reach 200 degrees Celsius during the day and drop to -150 at night. The atmospheric pressure is 12 times that of your Earth. Shadow Maws are apex predators. They hunt in packs and have been known to take down creatures 10 times their size." Sarah nodded, absorbing the information. "Pack hunters with high intelligence, social creatures then. That's promising." "Promising?" Voss's 3 eyes widened in disbelief. "Doctor, this creature has acid for blood, claws that can cut through battle armor, and a bite force that could snap a shuttle in half. How is any of that promising?" "Because social creatures understand concepts like loyalty, trust, and companionship," Sarah explained, her eyes never leaving the pacing Shadow Maw. "They form bonds. They have emotional needs beyond mere survival." The station chief made a sound that Sarah had learned was the Zentaurian equivalent of a skeptical laugh. "With respect, Doctor, that creature has no emotions beyond rage and hunger. Our psychic specialists attempted to read its mind and reported only chaotic violence and an overwhelming desire to kill." Sarah finally turned away from the observation window. "Commander, may I ask you something personal? Do you have family?" The question seemed to catch Voss off guard. "I have a mate, and 3 offspring, yes. But I fail to see—" "And how do you feel when they're threatened?" "Protective. Aggressive. I would destroy anything that tried to harm them." Understanding began to dawn in his expression. "You think the creature is responding to perceived threats?" "I think that creature is scared, isolated, and responding the only way it knows how." Sarah gathered her equipment. "I'd like to review the capture footage and interview the team that brought it in." 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the station's briefing room with Captain Thane, the grizzled Vorthon mercenary who had led the capture mission. His reptilian features were scarred from countless battles, and his yellow eyes held the cold calculation of a professional soldier. The job was supposed to be simple, Thane explained, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who had seen too much violence. "Rich Collector wanted a live Shadow Maw for his private menagerie. We tracked a pack to their nesting grounds on Nexus 7. "Nesting grounds?" Sarah interrupted. "So they were protecting young?" Thane's scaled brow furrowed. "Yeah, there were juveniles present. Small ones couldn't have been more than a few months old. We used sonic disruptors to scatter the pack and tranquilizer nets to bring down the largest adult. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. What happened to the young ones? Left them. Contract was for one adult specimen only. Thane seemed genuinely puzzled by her concern. They were too small to be worth anything, and the client only wanted a full-grown beast for his collection. So you separated a parent from its children and left the young ones defenseless on a death world? Sarah's voice remained level, but Voss noticed her hands clenching into fists. Standard operating procedure for live captures, Thane replied defensively. Can't haul around a whole family. Besides, Shadowmaw young are remarkably resilient. They probably survived just fine. Sarah stood abruptly. I need to see the creature. Now. The containment facility's lower levels hummed with the sound of force field generators and environmental controls. Sarah walked past several smaller cells containing various captured specimens, a crystalline entity from the boson sector, a shape-shifting blob from the periphery, and several other exotic creatures that wealthy collectors paid enormous sums to acquire. The Shadowmaw's enclosure was at the end of the corridor, a massive chamber designed to replicate the harsh environment of its home world. Sarah approached the viewing panel and activated the internal monitors. The creature was no longer pacing. Instead, it lay curled in the far corner of the enclosure, its massive head resting on its clawed hands. As Sarah watched, she noticed something that the security reports had failed to mention. The beast's shoulders were shaking. It's crying, she whispered, more to herself than to Voss, who had accompanied her. Impossible, the commander replied. Shadowmaws don't produce tears. They don't have the necessary— Not physically crying, Sarah interrupted, but look at its posture. The way it's holding itself, that's grief, Commander. That creature is mourning. She activated the intercom system that connected to the enclosure's speakers. Hello, she said softly. I know you can't understand my words, but maybe you can hear the tone. I'm not here to hurt you. The Shadowmaw's head lifted slightly, and one red eye focused on the viewing panel where Sarah stood. I know you miss them, she continued, her voice gentle. I know you're afraid and angry and hurt. I'm going to try to help you. For the next 3 days, Sarah established a routine. Every morning at 0800 hours, she would arrive at the containment facility with a meal for the Shadowmaw. Instead of using the automated feeding systems, she insisted on personally delivering the food through the secured airlock system. The first day, the creature retreated to the far side of its enclosure, watching her with obvious suspicion as she placed the meal near the entrance and withdrew. The second day, it waited until she was completely gone before approaching the food. On the third day, the Shadowmaw remained in the center of its enclosure while she delivered its meal, though it still kept its distance. This is madness, Voss commented as he watched Sarah's daily ritual through the security monitors. You're making no measurable progress. The creature still won't allow anyone within 50 meters of it. Patience, Sarah replied. Trust takes time to build. Trust? The commander's 3 eyes blinked rapidly. Doctor, that thing would tear you apart the moment you dropped the barriers. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on studying the creature's behavior patterns, looking for signs of intelligence and emotional complexity that others had missed. She noticed how the Shadowmaw always faced the entrance when she arrived, how its posture changed when she spoke, how it seemed to track her movements even when she wasn't directly visible. On the 4th day, she made a breakthrough. As she placed the meal in the usual spot, Sarah noticed the creature had moved something during the night. Several pieces of debris from its initial rampage, broken equipment, and damaged wall panels had been arranged in a specific pattern near where it normally rested. Sarah activated the enclosure's scanning systems and took detailed images of the arrangement. When she uploaded them to the station's computer for analysis, the results sent a chill down her spine. The debris had been arranged to resemble the basic structure of a nest. "It's trying to recreate its home environment," she explained to Voss later that evening. "This isn't just instinctive behavior. The creature is actively attempting to cope with its psychological trauma through familiar patterns." "You're anthropomorphizing it," Voss argued, "assigning human emotions and motivations to an alien predator." "No, I'm recognizing that intelligence and emotional complexity aren't uniquely human traits," Sarah countered. "This creature has demonstrated problem-solving abilities, emotional responses, and behavioral adaptation. It's not a mindless beast. It's a thinking, feeling being that's been ripped away from everything it knows." The breakthrough came on the 7th day. Sarah arrived to find the shadow maw had moved its makeshift nest closer to the entrance where she always placed its food. More significantly, it had arranged some of the smaller debris pieces in what appeared to be miniature versions of the larger nest structure. "Surrogate children," Sarah breathed, understanding flooding through her. "It's creating substitutes for the young ones it lost." That day, instead of simply placing the food and leaving, Sarah sat down on the floor of the airlock chamber. The barrier between her and the creature remained active, but for the first time, she remained in the shadow maw's direct line of sight while it ate. The creature approached its meal cautiously, never taking its eyes off her. But it did eat, and when it finished, it didn't retreat to its corner. Instead, it moved to the barrier and sat down, mirroring Sarah's position. For 30 minutes, human and shadow maw simply observed each other in silence. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Kravik, the station's chief xenobiologist, remarked as he reviewed the security footage. The elderly Mentari's 4 arms gestured excitedly, and his bulbous head bobbed with enthusiasm. "In 3 centuries of xenobiological study, I've never seen a Class 5 predator demonstrate such complex behavioral adaptation in captivity." Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on planning the next phase of her work with the creature. "I want to request permission to enter the enclosure." "Absolutely not," Voss responded immediately. "The risk is unacceptable." "The creature is showing clear signs of trust-building behavior," Sarah argued. "Yesterday it actually approached the barrier when I sat down." "It's trying to establish a connection. Or it's learning your patterns so it can attack more effectively when given the opportunity," the commander countered. "Sir," Dr. Kravik interjected, "while I share your concerns about Dr. Chen's safety, I must admit that her methods have produced remarkable results. The creature's stress indicators have decreased by 60% since she began her daily interactions. Its aggressive displays have virtually ceased, and it's showing signs of psychological recovery." Sarah seized on the support. "Commander, I'm not suggesting we remove all safety precautions. We could modify the barrier system to allow limited physical contact while maintaining containment protocols." Voss considered this for several long moments, his 3 eyes cycling through different emotional states. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A graduated exposure program. We install a secondary barrier system that creates a small interaction chamber. I can make limited physical contact through secured openings while maintaining full containment of the creature." "And what do you hope to accomplish with this physical contact?" Sarah had been thinking about that question for days. "I want to see if touch can bridge the communication gap. Many species respond to tactile reassurance as a bonding mechanism. If I can establish that level of trust, we might be able to address the creature's psychological trauma more effectively." "To what end?" Voss asked. "Even if you succeed in calming the beast, it's still destined for a private collector's menagerie. This entire exercise is academic." "Maybe not," Sarah replied quietly. "I've been reviewing galactic conservation laws. If I can prove that shadow maws demonstrate sapient-level intelligence and emotional complexity, they would qualify for protected status under the Sentient Rights Accords." The room fell silent. Dr. Kravik's eyes widened, and Commander Voss's mandibles clicked rapidly. You're talking about freeing a Class 5 predator into the general population, Voss said finally. I'm talking about recognizing that what we've classified as a predator might actually be a sentient being with rights that we've been systematically violating, Sarah corrected. If shadow maws are truly intelligent, then capturing them for private collections is essentially slavery. The modification of the containment system took another week. Station engineers worked around the clock to install the secondary barrier array and interaction chamber that Sarah had requested. The new system allowed for a small opening, barely large enough for a human hand, through which limited physical contact could be established while maintaining full containment protocols. On the morning of the first contact attempt, half the station's personnel gathered in the observation deck to witness the event. Sarah tried to ignore the crowd as she entered the interaction chamber, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The Shadow Maw was waiting, as it had been every day for the past 2 weeks. It had positioned itself directly across from where Sarah usually sat, and its makeshift nest of debris had been arranged with even more care than before. The tiny surrogate young had been placed prominently at the front of the arrangement. Sarah sat down and placed her hand near the small opening in the barrier. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm here, just like always. But today, I'd like to try something new." The creature's red eyes focused intently on her outstretched hand. For several minutes, neither moved. Then, slowly, the Shadow Maw rose from its resting position and approached the barrier. Sarah held her breath as the massive creature lowered its head to examine the opening. At this distance, she could see details that the observation cameras had missed: the intricate patterns in its carapace, the intelligence in its eyes, and something else that made her heart race. Scars, fresh ones, around the creature's neck and limbs, where capture restraints had been applied. "They hurt you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry they hurt you." The Shadow Maw's head tilted slightly, as if it could understand the emotion in her voice, if not the words themselves. Then, with movements so careful they seemed almost reverent, it extended one massive claw toward the opening. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached through the gap and gently touched the tip of her finger to the creature's claw. The effect was immediate and profound. The Shadow Maw's entire body went still, and a sound unlike anything Sarah had ever heard began to emanate from its throat, a deep, complex harmony that seemed to resonate through the chamber's walls. "What's it doing?" Voss's voice came through the intercom, tight with concern. "I think—" Sarah paused, overwhelmed by the moment. "I think it's singing." For 10 minutes, Human and Shadow Maw maintained contact while the creature produced its haunting melody. When it finally stopped, the Shadow Maw carefully withdrew its claw and settled back into its resting position, but its eyes never left Sarah's face. "Remarkable," Dr. Kravik breathed over the comm system. "I've never seen anything like it. The creature's neural activity is off the charts. Whatever just happened, it triggered a massive response in its higher brain functions." Sarah remained in the interaction chamber for another hour. Simply sitting in the presence of the creature she was beginning to understand was far more than anyone had imagined. When she finally rose to leave, the Shadow Maw did something that brought tears to her eyes. It reached into its nest of debris and carefully selected one of the small pieces it had been using as surrogate young. Moving with deliberate precision, it placed the object near the barrier opening. A gift, offered with the same care a parent might show in giving a treasured possession to a trusted friend. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters, staring at the small piece of debris the Shadow Maw had offered her. It was nothing remarkable, just a fragment of broken circuitry from the chamber's original equipment. But to the creature, it had represented something precious enough to share. Her door chimed, and Commander Voss entered without waiting for permission. "Dr. Chen, I've been reviewing the day's footage and consulting with my superiors. What you accomplished today has implications far beyond this station. Sarah looked up at him. You're going to stop the experiment. On the contrary, Voss replied, surprising her. I'm authorizing its expansion. Admiral Threen of the Zentaurian Defense Force has expressed interest in your methods. It seems we have other situations where your particular skills might prove valuable. Other captured shadow maws. Other creatures that have proven difficult to manage, Voss corrected. The galaxy is full of species that we've classified as hostile or untamable. But if your theories about emotional complexity and trust building are correct, we may have been approaching these beings entirely wrong. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. What exactly are you proposing? A joint venture between the Zentaurian Science Division and human xenobiological research teams. We want you to develop protocols for establishing communication and trust with hostile alien species, starting with our friend down in containment. And what happens to the Shadow Maw? Voss's three eyes met hers with surprising warmth. If you can prove it's truly sentient, as you claim, then it will be granted protected status and returned to its homeworld. The collector who commissioned its capture has been informed that his contract is void due to potential violations of sentient rights legislation. Sarah stood, clutching the small piece of debris the creature had given her. I'll need a full research team and unlimited access to the creature. Done. And I want to lead an expedition to Nexus 7 to check on the young ones that were left behind. Voss paused. That's a considerably more dangerous proposition. Commander, if I'm right about Shadow Maw intelligence and social structure, then reuniting this creature with its offspring isn't just ethical, it's essential for understanding their true nature. The station chief considered this for a long moment. Very well, but you'll have full military escort and emergency extraction protocols. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she found herself thinking about the moment when she had first touched the Shadow Maw's claw. In that instant, she had felt something pass between them, not just acceptance, but recognition. Two intelligent beings, acknowledging each other's worth despite the vast differences in their nature. It was, she realized, the foundation of something much larger than a single research project. It was the beginning of a new understanding of what it meant to find common ground with the strange and dangerous creatures that populated the galaxy's vast reaches. The humans, it seemed, had a gift for seeing past the surface, for finding the spark of consciousness and emotion that existed in even the most fearsome beings. And in a galaxy full of species that had given up on the possibility of communication with hostile alien life, that gift was about to become humanity's greatest contribution to interstellar civilization. 3 months after Dr. Sarah Chen's breakthrough with the Shadow Maw, news of her success had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. What had started as a simple research project on a remote Zentaurian station had become the most talked-about development in xenobiological circles in over a century. Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the UES Harmony, watching the swirling purple clouds of the Nexus 7 system grow larger on the view screen. As the lead pilot for the Shadow Maw repatriation mission, he had heard the stories about Dr. Chen's work, but seeing the creature in person had been something else entirely. Still can't believe it, muttered Lieutenant Torres, the ship's communications officer. 3 days ago, that thing was supposedly the most dangerous predator in known space. Now it's riding in our cargo bay like a passenger. Marcus nodded, thinking back to the loading process on Station Zeta 9. The Shadow Maw had walked calmly onto the transport ship, following Dr. Chen as docilely as a domesticated pet. No restraints, no sedation, no force fields, just trust. Contact from the surface, Torres announced. Dr. Chen's expedition team has located the original nesting site. Marcus activated the comm system. Dr. Chen, this is Captain Rivera. What's your status down there? Sarah's voice crackled through the speakers, filled with excitement despite the harsh environmental conditions. Marcus, you need to see this. The young ones not only survived, they've been waiting. It's like they knew their parent would return. The landing on Nexus 7 had been challenging, even for an experienced pilot like Marcus. The planet's surface was a hellscape of jagged rocks, sulfurous geysers, and temperatures that could melt lead. But somehow, life had found a way to thrive in this hostile environment. Dr. Chen's ground team had been tracking the Shadow Maw juveniles for 2 days, using genetic scanners and behavioral pattern analysis. What they found defied every assumption about the species. "Captain," came Dr. Chen's voice again, "we're ready for the reunion. You can release our passenger." Marcus looked at Commander Voss, who had insisted on personally overseeing the operation. The Zentaurian's 3 eyes were focused intently on the environmental readings streaming in from the surface. Surface temperature is 180 degrees Celsius, atmospheric pressure is 11 times Earth normal, and there are sulfur storms predicted within the next 6 hours, Voss reported. "Are you certain about this, Dr. Chen?" "I'm certain," came her reply. "Trust me." Marcus activated the cargo bay release systems. Through the external cameras, he watched the Shadow Maw emerge from the ship and pause at the top of the loading ramp. For a moment, the massive creature simply stood there, its red eyes scanning the familiar landscape of its home world. Then it raised its head and released a sound that made the ship's hull vibrate, a deep, resonant call that seemed to carry for kilometers across the desolate terrain. The response was immediate. From crevices and rocky outcroppings across the landing zone, smaller shapes began to emerge. The juvenile Shadow Maws moved with the same fluid grace as their parent, but their carapaces still showed the lighter coloration of youth. What happened next brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Despite his years of military service and deep space exploration, the adult Shadow Maw descended the ramp and was immediately surrounded by its offspring. The reunion was accompanied by a complex chorus of vocalizations, the deep tones of the adult harmonizing with the higher pitches of the juveniles in a symphony that seemed to express joy, relief, and love in ways that transcended species barriers. "My God," whispered Torres from his station. "They're actually singing to each other." Dr. Chen's voice came through the comm, thick with emotion. "The family structure is more complex than we ever imagined. The juveniles have been caring for each other in the parents' absence, but they've also been maintaining the nesting site, keeping it ready for this exact moment." Commander Voss's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep thought among his species. "Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that Shadow Maws have cultural traditions, that they pass down knowledge of family bonds and loyalty through some form of teaching?" "I'm suggesting that we've barely scratched the surface of understanding these beings," Sarah replied. "The young ones didn't just survive, they preserved their family's legacy. That level of forward thinking and emotional commitment rivals anything we've seen in the most advanced species." As the Harmony prepared to depart Nexus 7, Marcus found himself thinking about the implications of what they had witnessed. Word of the successful repatriation would spread throughout the galaxy within days, and if he knew anything about human nature, this wouldn't be the last such mission. He was right. 2 weeks later, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the emergency briefing room of the Galactic Council's Crisis Response Center on Centauri Prime. The assembled representatives included members from 12 different species, all looking various degrees of desperate and skeptical. "The situation on Kepler 442b has deteriorated rapidly," announced Councillor Zrath, the reptilian Vorthon, who served as the session's moderator. "The mining colony established there 6 months ago has lost contact with 3 separate teams attempting to extract rare Earth elements from the planet's core region." Dr. Vasquez studied the mission files on her data pad. "What exactly is the threat profile?" The initial reports mentioned aggressive indigenous life forms, but the descriptions are vague. Councillor Mikrin of the Mentari delegation gestured with all 4 of his arms in agitation. The creatures are unlike anything in our databases. They measure approximately 8 meters in length, possess crystalline exoskeletons that deflect energy weapons, and demonstrate tactical intelligence in their attacks. Tactical intelligence? Elena raised an eyebrow. Can you elaborate? They've learned to disable mining equipment, destroy communication arrays, and coordinate group attacks that suggest advanced planning capabilities, explained Captain Derex, a Krillian military officer whose blue skin bore the scars of numerous battles. We've designated them as Apex-class threats and recommended complete withdrawal from the sector. Elena frowned as she continued reading. Your reports mention that the attacks only began after mining operations started targeting what you've called anomalous crystal formations in the deep cave systems. Has anyone considered that these formations might be important to the creatures? Important how? Counselor Zrath asked. Nesting sites, religious locations, food sources, any number of things, Elena replied. The pattern suggests defensive behavior rather than predatory aggression. Captain Derex's combat armor clinked as he shifted in his seat. Dr. Vasquez, with respect, these creatures have killed 17 beings and destroyed millions of credits worth of equipment. Whether their behavior is defensive or predatory is irrelevant. They represent a clear and present danger. Has anyone attempted to communicate with them? The room fell silent. Elena looked around at the assembled representatives, noting the expressions of confusion and disbelief on their alien faces. Communicate? Counselor Mikrin's voice carried a note of incredulity. Doctor, these are primitive creatures operating on pure instinct. Communication would be impossible. Elena pulled up the mission files from the Shadow Maw repatriation on her datapad and projected them onto the main display. 3 months ago, the Zentarian Science Division said the exact same thing about Shadow Maws. Today, Dr. Sarah Chen is leading a joint research project that has established peaceful contact with 17 different Shadow Maw packs. She highlighted several key sections of the report. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen recognized that the creature's aggressive behavior was actually a response to emotional trauma. They weren't mindless predators. They were intelligent beings reacting to what they perceived as threats to their family units. Captain Derex leaned forward in his chair. You're suggesting that the crystal creatures on Kepler 442b might be sapient? I'm suggesting that humanity's experience with hostile xenofauna has taught us to look beyond surface behaviors and examine underlying motivations, Elena replied. If these creatures are only attacking when their habitat is threatened, then the solution isn't military force, it's negotiation. The debate that followed lasted for 3 hours. Military representatives argued for immediate withdrawal or aggressive response protocols. Scientific delegations pushed for extended observation and analysis. Economic interests demanded a solution that would allow mining operations to continue. In the end, Elena's proposal was accepted by a narrow margin. A joint human-alien team would attempt to establish peaceful contact with the crystal creatures, with the goal of finding a solution that protected both the mining colony and the indigenous life forms. The journey to Kepler 442b took 2 weeks aboard the research vessel Endeavour. Elena spent the time studying every scrap of data about the planet and its mysterious inhabitants. The crystalline creatures, which the mining teams had dubbed prismlings due to their habit of refracting light through their exoskeletons, lived in vast cave networks that honeycombed the planet's crust. Dr. James Wright, the mission's xenobiologist, was skeptical of Elena's approach. These creatures are nothing like the Shadow Maws, he argued during one of their planning sessions. They're silicon-based life forms with completely alien biochemistry. We have no basis for assuming human psychological techniques will be effective. Maybe not, Elena agreed, but we have to try. The alternative is either abandoning a potentially valuable mining site or exterminating an entire species. When they arrived in the Kepler 442b system, Elena was struck by the planet's beauty. The world was smaller than Earth, with a thinner atmosphere that created brilliant aurora displays across its surface. The crystal formations that attracted the mining companies glittered like diamonds in the planet's twin suns. The mining colony's administrator, a nervous Tellurian named Gavix, met them at the landing pad with obvious relief. "Thank the void you're here," he said, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "We lost another survey team yesterday. The creatures are getting more aggressive, and our security forces are stretched to their limits." Elena examined the latest attack reports as Gavix led them to the colony's command center. The pattern was consistent with what she had observed in the earlier files. The Prismlings only attacked when mining operations encroached on certain areas of the cave systems. "Show me the location of yesterday's incident," she requested. Gavix brought up a holographic map of the mining complex. The attack had occurred in Deep Shaft 7, one of the newer excavation sites that had been targeting a particularly rich vein of rare crystals. "Have you noticed any correlation between attack severity and the proximity to specific crystal formations?" Elena asked. "What kind of correlation?" "The creatures seem most aggressive when mining operations target certain areas. I'm wondering if those areas have special significance." Gavix studied the map for several minutes, his multiple eyes tracking different data streams simultaneously. "Now that you mention it, the most violent encounters have all occurred within 50 meters of what we've classified as Type A crystal matrices, large, complex formations that seem to grow in specific geometric patterns." Elena felt the familiar excitement of a breakthrough beginning to form. "I need to see one of these Type A formations. In person." "Absolutely not," interrupted Commander Thaley, the security chief. "The caves are far too dangerous. Those creatures could be anywhere." "Which is exactly why I need to go," Elena replied. "If we're going to establish communication, it has to be on their terms in their environment." The descent into Deep Shaft 7 took place at dawn, when the Prismlings were typically less active. Elena wore a lightweight environmental suit and carried minimal equipment, just basic recording devices and a universal translator that had been calibrated for silicon-based life forms. The cave system was breathtaking. Crystalline formations covered every surface, creating a maze of tunnels that refracted the team's helmet lights into countless rainbows. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with inner light, and Elena realized that the crystals were actually bioluminescent. "Movement ahead," reported Sergeant Corvus, the mission's military escort. 3 contacts approximately 200 meters. Elena activated her suit's external speakers. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm here to talk. I mean no harm to you or your home." The response was immediate. A sound like wind chimes mixed with thunder echoed through the caves, and the bioluminescent patterns in the walls began to shift and dance. Then, 3 massive shapes emerged from the depths of the tunnel system. The Prismlings were even more magnificent than the security footage had suggested. Each creature stood nearly 8 meters tall, with bodies composed of living crystal that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light. As they moved, their forms created complex patterns of refracted illumination that painted the cave walls in constantly shifting colors. "They're beautiful," Elena whispered. The lead Prismling approached to within 10 meters and stopped. It began to produce a series of harmonic tones that resonated through the crystal formations, creating a symphony that seemed to encompass the entire cave system. Elena's universal translator was working frantically to decode the sounds, but the patterns were too complex. Whatever language the Prismlings used, it was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Then Elena noticed something that made her heart race. The creature wasn't just making sounds, it was conducting light. As it vocalized, the patterns of bioluminescence in its body changed, creating visual displays that seemed to accompany its auditory communication. "It's not just sound," she said into her comm unit. They're using light and sound together. Multispectral communication. She activated her suit's light projectors and began to experiment with simple patterns. Basic geometric shapes projected onto the cave wall. The response from the prismlings was immediate and enthusiastic. All three creatures began creating their own light displays, mimicking and elaborating on Elena's patterns. For the next 2 hours, human and prismlings engaged in a complex dance of light and sound. Gradually, Elena began to recognize recurring patterns in their displays. When she projected images of the mining equipment, the creatures responded with harsh, discordant tones and agitated light patterns. But when she showed images of the undisturbed crystal formations, their responses were harmonious and peaceful. The breakthrough came when Elena activated a holographic display showing the mining operations from the prismlings' perspective. She showed the drilling equipment breaking into their crystal formations, destroying structures that had taken centuries to grow. The lead prismling's response was immediate and heartbreaking. Its bioluminescent display showed images of smaller prismlings, juveniles that had been living within the crystal matrices that the miners had destroyed. The mining operations hadn't just been damaging their habitat, they had been killing their children. "My God," Elena breathed. "We've been destroying their nurseries." The rest of the communication session took on a completely different tone. The prismlings weren't hostile invaders. They were desperate parents trying to protect their young from what they perceived as an unprovoked attack on their families. Elena spent the next 3 days establishing a basic vocabulary of light and sound patterns with the prismlings. The creatures demonstrated intelligence that rivaled any spacefaring species, complex social structures, and a deep understanding of crystal growth and formation that could revolutionize mining technology. When she finally returned to the colony's surface, Elena carried with her a proposal that would change everything. Instead of fighting the prismlings, the mining company could work with them. The creatures could guide the miners to crystal formations that could be harvested without damaging nursery areas, and in return, they would share their knowledge of crystal cultivation. The initial reaction from the mining consortium was skeptical, but the economic projections were compelling. Working with the prismlings would increase yields by 300% while reducing equipment costs and eliminating security expenses. Within 6 months, Kepler 442b had become the most profitable mining operation in the galaxy, and the prismlings had been granted full recognition as a sapient species under galactic law. News of Elena's success reached Earth just as Dr. Marcus Thompson was preparing for his own assignment on the frontier world of Ragnar 9. The planet had been abandoned by 3 different colonization attempts due to attacks by what the colonists had termed shadow wolves, pack hunters that seemed to materialize from darkness itself and had been responsible for dozens of deaths. Marcus read Elena's reports as his ship approached the Ragnar system, paying particular attention to her methods of establishing initial contact. The pattern was becoming clear. What other species saw as mindless aggression, humans were beginning to recognize as complex behavioral responses to specific situations. "We have a problem," announced Captain Lisa Park as Marcus finished reviewing the files. "Long-range sensors are picking up massive electromagnetic disturbances in the planet's upper atmosphere. The shadow wolves aren't the only danger down there." Marcus looked up from his data pad to see the main view screen displaying Ragnar 9. The planet was shrouded in constant electrical storms that created a natural barrier against most forms of technology. "Have any of the previous expeditions attempted to study the connection between the electromagnetic phenomena and the shadow wolf attacks?" he asked. Captain Park pulled up the colonization reports. The first expedition attributed the attacks to normal predatory behavior. The second expedition theorized that the electromagnetic storms interfered with their weapons systems, giving the wolves an advantage. The third expedition concluded that the entire planet was simply too hostile for human habitation. Marcus studied the attack reports, looking for patterns that others might have missed. What if the electromagnetic storms aren't just environmental hazards? What if they're somehow connected to the wolves themselves? You think the creatures can control the electrical activity? I think, Marcus said slowly, that we might be dealing with beings that exist partially in electromagnetic spectrum ranges that most species can't perceive. If the shadow wolves are somehow native to the electrical storms, then every human settlement would appear to be an invasion of their natural habitat. The landing on Ragnar 9 had to be timed precisely between electromagnetic pulses to avoid having their equipment fried by the constant electrical activity. Marcus and his team established a temporary base in the ruins of the most recent colonization attempt, using the abandoned structures for shelter while they began their investigation. The first shadow wolf attack came on their second night. Marcus was reviewing sensor data when the camp's perimeter alarms activated. But instead of the usual warnings about approaching life forms, the sensors were detecting massive electromagnetic anomalies moving through the darkness. "Contact," reported Sergeant Adams, the mission's security chief. "Multiple bogies approaching from the northwest. They're not showing up on thermal or motion sensors, just electromagnetic signatures." Marcus grabbed his equipment and headed for the camp's observation post. Through his night vision goggles, he could see shapes moving in the darkness, but they weren't quite solid. The shadow wolves seemed to exist somewhere between physical matter and pure energy, phasing in and out of visibility like living lightning. "Don't fire unless directly threatened," Marcus ordered. "I want to observe their behavior patterns." For 2 hours, the shadow wolves circled the human encampment. They moved with intelligence and purpose, testing the camp's defenses and probing for weaknesses. But they didn't attack. "They're studying us," Marcus realized, "just like we're studying them." The revelation changed everything about how Marcus approached the situation. Instead of treating the shadow wolves as mindless predators, he began to consider them as fellow researchers, beings trying to understand the strange creatures that had invaded their world. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the electromagnetic storms weren't random weather patterns. They were communication networks. The shadow wolves existed partially in electrical form, using the planet's constant electrical activity to share information across vast distances. Working with Dr. Sarah Kim, the mission's electromagnetic specialist, Marcus developed a way to tap into the electrical communication grid. By modulating their own electromagnetic emissions, they could potentially communicate with the shadow wolves using their own language. The first successful contact was achieved by transmitting simple mathematical sequences through the electromagnetic spectrum. The response was immediate. The shadow wolves began transmitting increasingly complex mathematical patterns, demonstrating intelligence that far exceeded anything the previous expeditions had imagined. Over the course of several weeks, Marcus and his team established a basic communication protocol with the shadow wolves. The beings were not only intelligent but ancient. They had existed on Ragnar 9 for thousands of years, using the planet's electromagnetic properties to build a civilization that existed primarily in energy form. The attacks on human colonists hadn't been motivated by hunger or territorial aggression. They had been attempts to communicate with beings that the shadow wolves couldn't understand, creatures that existed only in physical form and seemed immune to electrical communication. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of establishing permanent physical colonies that disrupted the electromagnetic networks, humans could work with the shadow wolves to build settlements that enhanced the electrical communication grid. In return, the shadow wolves would share their advanced understanding of electromagnetic manipulation, technology that could revolutionize human understanding of energy-based systems. As news of Marcus's success spread throughout the galaxy, a pattern began to emerge. Human xenobiologists were achieving breakthrough after breakthrough in situations where other species had given up hope. The key wasn't superior technology or advanced weaponry. It was humanity's unique ability to look beyond surface behaviors and recognize the intelligence and emotional complexity that existed in even the most alien beings. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose work with the Shadow Maws had started it all, found herself appointed as the director of a new pan-galactic initiative, the Interspecies Understanding Project. Her mission was to train teams of human xenobiologists to work with hostile alien species throughout the galaxy, using the methods that had proven successful on worlds like Nexus 7, Kepler 442b, and Ragnar 9. "We're not trying to tame these creatures," she explained to the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. "We're trying to understand them, to recognize that intelligence and emotion take many forms, and that what we perceive as hostility might actually be fear, grief, or simply an attempt to communicate in ways we haven't learned to recognize." Counselor Zrath, who had been skeptical of human methods at the beginning, now listened with respectful attention. "Dr. Chen, your species has achieved something remarkable. In less than a year, you have transformed what we thought were unsolvable security threats into opportunities for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained serious. "We've only scratched the surface, Counselor. The galaxy is full of species that we've written off as too dangerous or too alien to understand. If we can change our approach, if we can learn to see past our own preconceptions and biases, there's no telling what kinds of relationships might be possible." As the session concluded and the various representatives departed for their home worlds, Sarah remained behind, looking out at the stars through the council chamber's vast viewing port. Somewhere out there, on countless worlds throughout the galaxy, humans were working to build bridges between species that had never imagined peaceful coexistence was possible. It was, she realized, perhaps the most important work humanity had ever undertaken, and it was only the beginning. 5 years had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen first touched the claw of a grieving Shadow Maw, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Interspecies Understanding Project had grown from a small research initiative into the largest diplomatic and scientific endeavor in known history, with human-led teams working on over 200 worlds throughout the galactic community. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood on the observation deck of the UES Unity, humanity's newest diplomatic vessel, watching the approach to Synthesis Station, the massive space platform that had become the hub of interspecies cooperation. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, built through the combined efforts of dozens of species working in harmony for the first time in galactic history. "Incoming transmission from Station Control," announced Lieutenant Commander Torres, who had transferred from the Harmony to serve as the Unity's communications chief. "They're requesting permission to deploy the Welcoming Committee." Rebecca smiled as she gave authorization. The Welcoming Committee had become one of Synthesis Station's most beloved traditions. As the Unity approached its docking port, a parade of creatures emerged from the station's various habitation modules to greet the arriving diplomats. A pack of Shadow Maws, their midnight carapaces gleaming in the starlight, performed an elaborate aerial dance around the ship. Their offspring, now fully grown, joined in the display with the same fluid grace their parents had shown years earlier. Nearby, a group of prismlings created spectacular light shows that painted the space around the station in cascading rainbows, while shadow wolves phased in and out of electromagnetic visibility as they raced through the station's energy grid. But these were just the beginning. Over the past 5 years, humanity's approach to xenobiological relations had led to peaceful contact with species that had been considered impossible to reach. The Void Singers, massive creatures that lived in the vacuum of space itself, now served as living communication relays between distant star systems. The Hive Hearts, insectoid beings from the galactic core, had revealed complex poetry hidden within what other species had dismissed as simple drone sounds. "Still gives me chills," Torres commented as they watched the display. Remember when these same creatures were classified as Class 5 extinction threats? Rebecca nodded, thinking back to her own role in the early days of the project. She had been a junior security officer when the first reports of Dr. Chen's success had reached Earth. Now, as the commanding officer of humanity's flagship diplomatic vessel, she had witnessed firsthand the transformation that had swept across the galaxy. The docking procedure was smooth, guided by a prism-link controller whose crystal-based intelligence could process navigation data faster than any traditional computer. As Rebecca and her team disembarked, they were greeted by Dr. Chen herself, now bearing the title of Director General of Interspecies Relations. "Rebecca, welcome to Synthesis Station," Sarah said, embracing her old friend. "I trust the journey from Earth went smoothly?" "As smooth as traveling with a diplomatic envoy of nightmare wraiths can be," Rebecca replied with a grin. "Though I have to admit, once you get past the psychic terror emanations, they're actually quite pleasant conversationalists." The nightmare wraiths had been humanity's most recent success story. The beings existed primarily in the realm of dreams and subconscious thought, appearing to other species as terrifying phantoms that induced panic and madness. But human sleep researchers had discovered that the wraiths were actually trying to communicate through shared dream experiences, using fear as a universal emotional language that could transcend species barriers. Sarah led Rebecca through the station's main corridor, past observation windows that looked out into specialized habitat modules designed for species with wildly different environmental requirements. In one module, flame dancers from the volcanic world of Infernus performed their traditional ritual dances in temperatures that would instantly vaporize most organic matter. In another, deep thinkers from the ocean world of Abyssos contemplated philosophical problems in pressurized water tanks that replicated their home environment. "The council is waiting for us in the main assembly hall," Sarah explained. "Today's session is particularly important. We're discussing the proposal for the Great Project." Rebecca had read about the Great Project during the journey to Synthesis Station, but she still found the scope of it difficult to comprehend. The initiative would involve cooperation between every known intelligent species in the galaxy, working together to explore the mysterious signals that had been detected from the galactic center. "Any word on what's actually transmitting those signals?" Rebecca asked. "Nothing conclusive yet," Sarah replied. "But the pattern analysis suggests something unprecedented, a form of intelligence that operates on a galactic scale. Whatever's sending those transmissions has been doing so for millions of years, and the signals are becoming more complex." The main assembly hall of Synthesis Station was a wonder to behold. The vast circular chamber had been designed to accommodate representatives from over 300 different species, each with their own environmental requirements and communication methods. Atmospheric zones shifted gradually from one section to another, allowing methane-breathing frost giants to sit adjacent to plasma-based energy beings without either group experiencing discomfort. Rebecca took her place in the human delegation section, next to Dr. Marcus Thompson, whose success with the Shadow Wolves had led to his appointment as Earth's primary xenobiological advisor. Around them, the hall filled with the most diverse assembly of sentient beings ever gathered in one place. "The Council recognizes Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Human Prismling Cooperative," announced the session moderator, a void singer whose communication consisted of modulated gravitational waves that were translated into audible speech for the benefit of physical species. Elena rose from her seat in the interspecies cooperation section, where humans now worked alongside representatives from dozens of former hostile species. The prismling beside her created a supportive light display that pulsed with encouraging colors. "Honored delegates," Elena began, her words being translated into hundreds of different communication modalities simultaneously, "the preliminary analysis of the galactic center signals has revealed something extraordinary. The transmissions aren't random. They're responding to us." A ripple of excitement passed through the assembly hall, expressed in the unique ways of each species. Shadow maws hummed harmonically, prismlings flashed in synchronized patterns, and shadow wolves created electromagnetic fluctuations that registered as musical tones. For the past 6 months, our combined research teams have been analyzing the signal patterns, Elena continued. Every time we achieve a breakthrough in interspecies cooperation, the signals become more complex. Every time we establish peaceful contact with a previously hostile species, the transmissions shift to incorporate new mathematical structures. Dr. Chen stood to address the assembly. What Elena is suggesting has profound implications for our understanding of intelligence itself. The signals appear to be coming from an entity or collective that has been observing the development of galactic civilization for millions of years. Counselor Zrath, now serving as the official representative of the Interspecies Cooperation Alliance, activated his translation device. "Are you proposing that this galactic entity has been waiting for us to achieve a certain level of cooperative development?" "That's exactly what we're proposing," Sarah replied. "The mathematical analysis suggests that the entity has been waiting for the galaxy's various species to move beyond conflict and begin working together as a unified civilization." The implications of this revelation sparked intense debate throughout the assembly hall. Some delegates expressed excitement at the prospect of contact with such an advanced intelligence. Others worried about the potential dangers of communicating with an entity whose capabilities were beyond comprehension. The discussion continued for hours, with each species contributing their unique perspective on the situation. The hive hearts, with their collective consciousness, saw parallels to their own social structure scaled up to galactic proportions. The deep thinkers raised philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness at such a vast scale. The flame dancers interpreted the signals as a form of cosmic art, expressing emotions too complex for smaller intelligences to fully grasp. In the end, it was Dr. Chen who proposed the solution that would define humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization. "We've learned something important over the past 5 years," she said, addressing the assembly with quiet confidence. "Intelligence isn't about size or power or technological advancement. It's about the ability to recognize consciousness in others, to empathize across differences, and to build connections based on understanding rather than fear." She gestured toward the diverse gathering of beings that filled the assembly hall. Every species here was once considered impossible to reach by at least one other species. But we've proven that with patience, empathy, and the willingness to look beyond surface behaviors, any form of consciousness can be understood and appreciated. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. "If there truly is a galactic intelligence waiting for us to mature as a civilization, then our response should embody the same principles that have brought us this far. We should approach it not with weapons or demands, but with curiosity and respect. We should try to understand what it needs and what it fears, just as we've learned to understand each other." The debate that followed was unlike any political discussion in galactic history. Instead of species arguing for their own interests, delegates worked together to craft a response that would represent the best aspects of their combined civilizations. Shadow maws contributed their understanding of family loyalty, prismlings offered their knowledge of harmonic communication, and shadow wolves shared their insights into existence across multiple states of being. The final proposal, when it emerged from weeks of collaborative development, was elegant in its simplicity. The galaxy's unified species would respond to the mysterious signals with a message that demonstrated everything they had learned about cooperation and understanding. Instead of trying to prove their technological advancement or military strength, they would share stories of how they had overcome their differences and learned to see the consciousness that existed in even the most alien beings. The construction of the Great Transmission Array took 3 years and required the combined efforts of every known intelligent species. Shadow Maws provided the physical labor, their immense strength allowing them to move components that would have required massive machinery for other species. Prismlings created the crystalline communication matrices that could modulate signals across vast distances. Shadow Wolves integrated the electromagnetic systems that would carry the message beyond the galaxy's edge. Meanwhile, human xenobiologists worked with representatives from each species to craft the content of the message itself. The transmission would include not just information about galactic civilization, but emotional content that demonstrated the depth of consciousness that had emerged through cooperation. Dr. Chen stood in the array's control center on the day of the first transmission, surrounded by the beings who had become her closest friends and colleagues. The Shadow Maw she had first befriended on Station Zeta 9 rested beside her, its offspring playing with young prismlings, whose crystal bodies refracted the control room's lights into dancing patterns. "All systems are green," reported Dr. Elena Vasquez from the primary transmission console. "We're ready to send humanity's gift to the galaxy." Sarah nodded and activated the communication array. Across thousands of worlds, beings of every imaginable type focused their attention on the galactic center, waiting to see if their message would receive a response. The answer came 18 hours later. The signal that returned from the galactic center was unlike anything that had been detected before. Instead of mathematical patterns or electromagnetic pulses, it carried something that transcended all species barriers: pure emotion, joy, recognition, and what could only be described as profound relief flooded through every consciousness in the galaxy simultaneously. But more than that, the responding signal carried information that revolutionized understanding of galactic history. The entity at the galaxy's center was not a single intelligence, but a collective consciousness formed from the merger of countless species that had achieved perfect cooperation millions of years ago. They had been waiting, with patience beyond mortal comprehension, for the current generation of galactic life to reach the same level of unified consciousness. "We are the first unity," the signal communicated through direct consciousness transfer that bypassed language entirely. "We have waited so long for others to join us in the great work of shepherding consciousness throughout the universe. You have shown that you understand what we learned so long ago, that intelligence without empathy is meaningless, and that the greatest achievements come not from conquest, but from the recognition that all consciousness is precious." The revelation transformed galactic civilization overnight. The knowledge that perfect cooperation was not only possible, but had been achieved before, provided a template for continued development. More importantly, the first unity shared their own discoveries, that consciousness existed in forms and scales that current species had never imagined, and that the universe itself might be awakening to awareness through the cooperative efforts of its intelligent inhabitants. Dr. Chen found herself appointed as humanity's first ambassador to the first unity, a role that would require her to spend years learning to expand her consciousness to galactic scales. But before she left for the deep reaches of space, she returned one last time to Station Zeta 9, where her journey had begun. The Shadow Maw was waiting for her in the same containment facility where they had first met, though the space had been transformed into a comfortable habitat where the creature could rest between its duties as an interspecies mediator. The makeshift nest of debris had been replaced with carefully crafted structures that honored both the creature's original culture and its new role in galactic society. "Hello, old friend," Sarah said softly, placing her hand against the barrier that was no longer necessary, but which the Shadow Maw preferred for the privacy it provided. The creature approached and gently touched its claw to hers, just as they had done years earlier. But now the touch carried new meaning. not just recognition between two individuals, but acknowledgement of the journey they had taken together from fear and misunderstanding to trust and cooperation. "Do you know what we've accomplished?" Sarah asked, though she knew the creature couldn't understand her words. "We've proven that consciousness finds a way to recognize itself, no matter how different the forms it takes. We've shown that empathy can bridge any gap, and that the universe is big enough for all kinds of intelligence to coexist." The Shadow Maw began to hum, the same complex harmony it had produced during their first contact. But now other voices joined in, prismlings creating light-based melodies, shadow wolves adding electromagnetic harmonies, and dozens of other species contributing their own forms of music to create a symphony that represented the unity of galactic consciousness. As Sarah listened to the music that surrounded her, she realized that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy hadn't been their technology or their military prowess. It had been their ability to see past the surface, to recognize the spark of consciousness that existed in every thinking being, and to respond to that consciousness with empathy rather than fear. The humans had proven that even the galaxy's deadliest beasts could become its most devoted friends, simply by taking the time to understand what lay beneath the surface of apparent hostility. In doing so, they had opened the door to a form of civilization that embraced all consciousness, no matter how alien it might appear. And in the vast reaches of space, the first unity watched and waited, knowing that the next phase of galactic evolution was about to begin, a phase where the boundaries between species would dissolve entirely, replaced by a unified consciousness that encompassed all thinking beings throughout the universe. The age of human empathy had transformed not just individual species relationships, but the very nature of what it meant to be intelligent in a universe full of infinite possibility. And somewhere in the galactic center, ancient beings who had once been as different as shadow maws and humans smiled with forms of happiness that transcended any single species' understanding of joy. The galaxy had finally learned to sing in harmony, and the universe itself was listening.